Chapter 1201, Professional. The pupils of Bodis's eyes had already turned deep black, and they were frozen in a look of indescribable fear. It made Klein's heart palpitate when he saw it, as though he could feel the intense changes in Bodis's emotions before his death. After a series of inspections, together with divination, he confirmed that these two eyeballs didn't contain any beyonder characteristics, but they contained a strong corruptive force and a power that came from an unknown source. It could be used as a medium for curses, and it could directly affect the target. It was a rather dangerous spiritual material with an extremely long expiry date.
I can't bring it with me for extended periods of time. Otherwise, I might be weakened mentally, have nightmares every day, and suffer a physical mutation.
Klein casually summoned a square metal box and placed Bodis's two eyeballs into it. He didn't attempt to purify it, because once the item was shattered and purified, there would be nothing left. It would be too wasteful. Due to the fact that there was nothing wrong with the worms of Star, and that it was also a material that Klein understood the most, he quickly turned his attention to the black pocket. The results of divination surprised him, because it was a so-called interspatial object. The pocket only had the size of an adult man's palm, but in actual fact, it had the size of the two-bedroom apartment that the Moretti family had rented in Tingen in the very beginning. It was big enough to hold many things. This was made by Bodis using the powers of a secret sorcerer. In essence, the pocket wasn't an object but an entrance.
First, a region in the spirit world is distorted and isolated using space concealment. Then, use the chaos created when the spirit world overlaps with reality. As long as there are proper coordinates, one can directly reach their destination, opening the door to that hidden area and entering this pocket space. This is very similar to the method needed for sealing the box of the Great Old Ones. However, one door is in the spirit world, while the other is in the real world. This results in a sealed artifact or mystical item inside the interspatial pocket to also affect the wielder. From the looks of it, it doesn't seem to be of much use, as it can't eliminate the negative effects. Besides, I'm in the forsaken land of the gods, and can't connect to the spirit world. There's no use to having such a pocket. Also, I have to reinforce the power of space concealment from time to time. Otherwise, it will gradually lose its effectiveness. It's only suitable for demigods of the apprentice pathway, or an organization that has demigods of the apprentice pathway, or sealed artifacts that provide the relevant support. The name interspatial pocket is too lame. I wonder how Bodis named this item. Let's call it Traveler's Bag.
After confirming the degree of danger, Klein conjured a fake hand and placed it into the black pocket. Pitter-patter! A bunch of gems poured out as the fake hand was retracted and landed on the long, mottled table. The crystal-clear red, blue, green, white, black, and translucent colors instantly filled his eyes.
I should have predicted this. The corresponding materials of the apprentice pathway are gems. All the gems.
The expression on Klein's face turned spirited as he sighed with a smile. He reached out with his other hand and picked up a few gems to feel the weight and texture. Apart from these, there were also quite a number of spiritual materials in the traveler's bag. Some were commonly used, while others were relatively rare.
The box of the Great Old Ones, the secret sorcerer's beyonder characteristic, 9 worms of Star, Bodis's eyeballs, traveler's bag, and large amounts of gems and materials. This operation can be considered quite a harvest, enough for everyone to split it fairly. Unfortunately, Bodis had the ability to record beyonder powers in certain states. There's no need for him to bring too many sealed artifacts and mystical items with him. That would result in many negative effects. As a demigod, he should have a few good sealed artifacts. I wonder if they're hidden somewhere in the spirit world or at the Aurora Order headquarters. It's a pity that Bodis's soul had just collapsed as well, preventing me from using spirit channeling on it.
Klein shook his head and immediately returned to the real world. He found a hidden spot, put down the lantern, and set up a bestowment ritual. He wanted to see if he could bring 061, the box of the Great Old Ones, to the forsaken land of the gods. If he could attempt transforming the entire city of silver into toys and placing them on the first level of the sealed artifact. He could directly send it to the outside world through the sacrificial and bestowment rituals. This way, he could bypass the Giant King's court and Dark Angel Sadrier, and could ingeniously complete the Miracle Invoker ritual. After performing a series of tasks, Klein was done with his preparations as he reached out his right hand. He pulled out another himself before his actual body leaped into the fog of history and hid in the void of a time before the first epoch. He was worried that the box of the Great Old Ones would cause a random death the moment it passed through the sacrificial and bestowment door. In the fragments of light deep in the grayish-white fog, Klein took 4 steps counterclockwise and returned above the gray fog, responding to his own prayers. After the mysterious ancient door of sacrifice and bestowment took form, he slowly opened it. He waved his hand, summoning the box of the Great Old Ones that was enveloped by layers of forcers, throwing it into the gap behind the illusory door, towards the boundless darkness behind the door. At that moment, the void's darkness suddenly became corporeal, as though it formed an invisible barrier that blocked the door that had just opened. It floated in midair, unable to move forward. Klein frowned slightly as he watched this scene. He tried to stir the powers of Sapphira Castle and use the power at the level of an angel to push it forward, but he was unable to get the box of the Great Old Ones to break the barrier.
Indeed, the Forsaken Land of the Gods is sealed. It's just that I'm closely related to Sapphira Castle, so I could use it to respond. However, this cannot exceed a certain limit.
Klein nodded slightly. He retrieved the box of the Great Old Ones and threw it onto the junk pile. Then, he conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow and got the fake person to give the detailed information of the box of the Great Old Ones to Ma'am Hermit and Miss Justice. This was to remind them to bring the box of the Great Old Ones back to the real world within 24 hours and to release the magician Fours. While doing so, Klein had informed Miss Justice to sacrifice some top-grade ice cream to the Snake of Fate's Blessed before praying for the bestowment of the box of the Great Old Ones. As for the hermit Catalea, she didn't need to make any external requests due to her having brief luck. However, she needed to complete everything within a few minutes and sacrifice the box of the Great Old Ones above the gray fog once more. Backland, in the border between Eastborough and the Bridge area, in an apartment that had been in disrepair for years, Leonard, who was wearing red gloves and a black coat, was leading his team members to check the scene. As the reserve force of the Church of Evernight, they were undoubtedly filled with energy at nearly 10 at night. The wine-red-haired Cindy came over and reported to Leonard.
Captain, there's a serious crack on the walls here. Some of the walls have even been shattered. This apartment might not hold after the hurricane season next summer.
Leonard scanned his surroundings with his green eyes and nodded slightly.
Thankfully, this place is dangerous to begin with, and it has been abandoned for a long period of time. However, it's very strange that even tramps don't live here.
Cindy thought for a moment and said,
Captain, do you mean that there are Beyonders using this apartment, so they're secretly chasing away the tramps who sleep here?
Another red glove, Bob, happened to be checking the bottom of the wall and casually added,
And then they had an internal strife that developed into a battle. Something was then ignited?
That possibility can't be ruled out.
Leonard answered in a professional manner.
But have you noticed? Every place in this room has signs of corrosion, and there's a lack of the remnants left behind by tables and chairs that should exist. It looks too empty. This doesn't look like something a low or mid-sequence Beyonder can create. I suspect that it might involve a higher level of power.
After a series of inspections and discovering many abnormalities, the Red Gloves team under Leonard failed to find any further clues. They could only return to St. Samuel Cathedral first. Just as they arrived underground, a bishop came to look for Leonard, asking him to bring 2 members upstairs for a meeting. Leonard nodded thoughtfully. Without asking anything, he led Bob and Cindy through a secret passage into St. Samuel Cathedral. Following that, they followed the spiral staircase, and under the illumination of the crimson moonlight, they arrived in a room with many people. It was equipped with a blackboard. With just one glance, Leonard realized that there were quite a number of people who had worked with him before. They were from the Mandated Punishers, the Machinery Hive Mind, and MI9. Then he noticed the 3 demigods, Hora McHayden, Randall Valentinus, and Anthony Stevenson, as well as a black-haired, golden-eyed man who was clearly at the same level as them. Without waiting for Leonard's greeting, St. Anthony stood up in his red-patterned black robe and said in a deep voice,
There was a high-level battle in the outskirts of Backland. There was a terrifying contamination present, as well as a tarot card, the Hermit. I noticed that you've done some investigations regarding the large number of incidents involving tarot cards. You had also raised a corresponding theory. Now please give everyone here a detailed introduction.
The Hermit card?
Leonard expressed his true astonishment, but this was mostly because he was tasked with such a mission. Ahem. He cleared his throat, walked to the blackboard, and turned to face the demigods and beyonders of the three churches and the military. He drew a crimson moon on his chest. After organizing his words, this red-glove captain said solemnly,
In the past 2 to 3 years, the incident involving tarot cards that really caught our attention was because of Lenavis's death. He was embroiled in a conspiracy that attempted to allow the true creator's descent, and his body was covered with tarot cards. After that, the tarot cards appeared on the Capim case again. However, this time, there was a change in the arrangement of the tarot cards. It emphasized judgment and the emperor. Back then, I linked these matters to an organization that suddenly believed in the Fool in Backland. As you know, the Fool is the starting card of the tarot cards.
This bold guess made several demigods and many other beyonders nod slightly. They felt that this might indeed be related to some level of mysticism. Lacas. Leonard paused before continuing.
And below the Fool, this organization might have quite a number of official members. They use tarot cards as code names, such as Judgment, the Emperor, or the Hermit of this incident.
As he spoke, Leonard picked up a deck of cards that he used as a demonstration and randomly picked one. He glanced at it and chuckled.
Such as the Star.
Chapter 1202, The Tarot Club. The demigods and beyonders present nodded at Leonard's demonstration, indicating that they understood what the Red Glove Captain meant. One of the mandated punishers raised his arm and took the opportunity to ask a question.
In other words, whoever left a tarot card behind is the member executing the mission?
That should be the case.
Leonard did not give a definite answer. The same mandated punisher continued asking,
What do the tarot cards that were scattered all over Lenavis's corpse mean then? There's no specific direction.
Leonard immediately picked up a white chalk and wrote the name Lenavis on the blackboard behind him. Then he drew a circle.
I've just said that in the past 2 to 3 years, the matter involving tarot cards have really caught our attention because of the Lenavis case. This is very likely the beginning of everything. Therefore, without a specific direction, the casually scattered tarot cards might be referring to the whole. This means that the organization that uses the tarot cards as codenames has officially stepped onto the stage of history. Heh, please forgive me for using poetic words.
That makes a lot of sense.
The few mandated punishers were convinced by Leonard. Leonard looked around and continued.
Let me use the Aurora Order, which everyone is familiar with, as a comparison. We all know that there are 22 oracles in the Aurora Order. Each of them will be in charge of a region's affairs. It's very possible that the organization with the tarot card codenames is the same. The members of the likes of Judgment, the Emperor, and the Hermit should have their own factions. They will exert their influence in a particular region.
Upon hearing this, a member of the machinery hive mind pondered and said,
However, the three members corresponding to Judgment, the Emperor, and the Hermit have appeared consecutively in Backland. According to what you just said, does this mean that the organization that uses tarot cards as codenames are still lacking in scale, and that the members are all gathered in Lowen, or perhaps just in the Backland region? After all, Backland's person in charge for the Aurora Order is only an oracle. As for St. Tenebrous, he's in charge of the entire Lowen.
Leonard slowly nodded, indicating that he understood what he meant. He organized his words and said,
This possibility cannot be ruled out. After all, this is an organization that has only appeared in the past 2 to 3 years. Of course, there might be other reasons. This organization might not be divided based on location demarcation. Instead, they are determined by whether or not they can handle an area alone. They will also work together depending on overlapping situations, such as the Capim case.
Seeing that the Beyonders of the three churches in MI9 didn't raise any further questions, Leonard deliberated for a few seconds before saying,
Next up will be all my personal guesses. There are also some problems with it. This might be a direction of investigation for the future. The first question: what is the purpose of this organization? If they are like the Aurora Order, with the goal to spread the faith of an evil god, then why haven't we discovered people who believe in the Fool? Even if there are, they're all people who are scamming others in the name of the Fool. Second question: what do they have in common in the few operations? I haven't been able to find it yet. The third question I have is that high-level members who use tarot cards as their code names are not of low sequences and have their own factions. However, they aren't famous in the Beyonder world at all. This is very abnormal. After all, although the 22 oracles of the Aurora Order hide their identities, they have more or less crossed paths with us. They rose up from low-sequence Beyonders to middle-sequence Beyonders under our watch, eventually taking over the spot as oracles when their predecessor dies or advances. They are all already on our lists.
Having said that, Leonard paused and said,
If the organization that uses the tarot cards as its code name is really an organization that believes in the Fool, then there is someone who can answer my third question. He's the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow. Rumor has it that he believes in the Fool.
This name made all the Beyonders from the three churches and MI9 fall into silence, as though they were quickly recalling the relevant information. They had long heard that Gehrman Sparrow had a mysterious background. He believed in the Fool, and they had obtained quite a bit of information from him. However, they hadn't made any connections like Leonard to string everything together. A few seconds later, the Archbishop of the Church of Evernight, St. Anthony, said in a deep voice,
Gehrman Sparrow seems to be in close contact with the original Death Consul of Balaam. That's an angel who's still active over the land.
This gave the Beyonders, who weren't demigods, a fright as they instinctively sat up straight. They all knew about Admiral Hell, but due to the confidential restrictions, they didn't know that the Death Consul represented a grounded angel.
That Death Consul doesn't seem to belong to any faction of the Numinous Episcopate,
said a Beyonder from MI9 hesitantly. Leonard nodded solemnly.
Perhaps he is a member of the secret organization that uses the tarot cards as a code name. Death Card!
There was another round of silence. All the demigods had to admit that this was possible. The level of the secret organization that was represented by tarot cards suddenly rose, reaching a level that was equal to the Aurora Order.
In short, Gehrman Sparrow is a clue.
Leonard took a deep breath and slowly said,
Your graces, ladies and gentlemen. I'm done.
St. Anthony nodded slightly and stood up. He looked around and said,
Up to now, this secret organization that uses tarot cards as their code names hasn't targeted us yet. It has shown a certain level of friendliness. Now that the war situation is tense, we are severely lacking in manpower, so it's difficult for us to take any major actions. Therefore, I suggest that we try our best to avoid conflict with them and not attempt to eradicate them for the time being. Of course, we have to do what we need to do. A secret organization, with the existence of a grounded angel itself, represents danger. If we don't understand it, or grasp enough information about it, we won't be able to react in time and stop any possible conspiracies.
Hormick and the other demigods thought for a moment before nodding in agreement. Anthony Stevens looked around, his gaze landing on Leonard's face.
This investigation will be led by you. Coordinate it well.
Pause.
Leonard agreed solemnly. At this moment, Deep Blue Efficient Randall Valentina spoke to Leonard impatiently.
Give them a name. We can't keep saying secret organization that uses tarot cards as a code name. It's quite a mouthful. What suggestions do you have?
Leonard considered carefully before saying,
Tarot Club?
That works.
Randall stood up and said, with a thunderous voice,
Let's call it the Tarot Club.
The exclusive dessert chef, Tim, suddenly woke up from his dream and stared at the ceiling in the darkness. He had just dreamed that he was enjoying an ice cream, and had just eaten it when he woke up. The more he thought about it, the more intense his cravings became. In the end, he overcame his feelings that it was trouble and got out of bed. Putting on a thick sleeping robe, he walked out of the room and came to a pantry not far away. As a slightly famous dessert chef in the aristocratic circles, Tim was given special privileges by Earl Hall. He could enter the pantry at any time and use the ingredients here to test his new ideas. Meanwhile, Tim had repeatedly returned Earl Hall's trust with high-quality desserts. Of course, he often appeared in the pantry due to midnight cravings for food, just like now. After some serious and hard work, Tim used the remains and prepared ingredients to make a few cups of ice cream and ate half of it. Then he patted his stomach, washed the cutlery, and left the pantry in satisfaction. The remaining few cups of ice cream were left in the corner, as if they had been completely forgotten. Wearing a dark-colored cloak, Audrey first made use of dream traversal to arrive nearby before walking over on foot. She skillfully set up the ritual and prayed to Mr. Fool. Soon, a silver-black accessory box embedded with many gems tore through the illusory door and landed in front of Audrey. Audrey tucked a wisp of blonde hair behind her ear and picked up the box of the Great Old Ones 0-61 without any delay. She aimed at a few rocks and pulled open the first layer. Silently, numerous long tables and chairs appeared messily in the area. Several Beyonders that had used various means to conceal their faces appeared. One of them was the hooded Fours. Their skin quickly changed from that of a toy's to that of a human's, and their eyes began to move. Fours, who had the highest sequence, recovered the fastest. Looking around, she was extremely surprised to find that she had unknowingly come to a flat by the side of the river from that apartment. Furthermore, this change was only limited to her overall area. The situation around her was no different from before.
Where am I? What happened?
Force's gaze landed on the empty altar. After pondering for a second, she seemed to understand something as she asked in surprise,
Has the matter ended? Yes,
replied Audrey, who was using her psychological invisibility.
it's ended. It's ended.
Fours followed up with a confused and dazed question.
How's the target?
He's dead.
Audrey was multitasking as she controlled the other 6 Beyonders. Her answer was very simple.
He's dead. Saint of Secrets Botus has died. I didn't participate in the battle. I didn't summon Gehrman Sparrow's historical void projection.
Fours' mouth gaped slightly as she felt like she was dreaming. She only felt that she had been terrified for a second and was in a daze for a moment, and the mission had already been completed. At this moment, she saw the surrounding Beyonders come to life, but they didn't show any surprise towards the change in environment. It was as if the gathering had been held here. They skillfully destroyed the chairs and long tables and threw them into the Tussock River. Then, they left the flats, one after another, and returned home under the illumination of the street lamps.
This is a manipulator. How terrifying.
Fours jumped in fright and completely snapped awake.
Return first.
Audrey didn't have time to explain. She turned around and used the altar from before, preparing to sacrifice the box of the Great Old Ones above the gray fog. Fours shot a look over, but she didn't ask or say anything. She made her body turn transparent as she vanished from where she was. Author's note: the title of this chapter originally should have been Official Debut, but it was just not serious enough. Chapter 1203, Harvest. In the ancient palace above the fog, dark red starlight shot up, forming several figures. Leonard did a casual glance, and his gaze suddenly froze on the silver-black jewelry box placed on the long modeled table. If he recalled correctly, this was likely a Grade 0 sealed artifact, the box of the Great Old Ones that the world Klein Moretti had specially emphasized during the private gathering. The Saint of Secrets was really in control of this Grade 0 sealed artifact? And he even used it? Yet Ma'am Hermit and Miss Justice succeeded? Leonard's pupils dilated slightly as he nearly couldn't believe his eyes. As an official Beyonder, a red-gloved captain of the Church of Evernight, he knew Grade 0 sealed artifacts very well. He knew that these items could easily destroy a city, causing people to suddenly die without putting up any resistance. When facing them, not only was contact with them impossible, but even understanding them was something that should be reduced if possible. Leonard originally believed that Ma'am Hermit and Miss Justice would leave the battlefield according to the plan after encountering a Grade 0 sealed artifact. They would then think of a way to rescue Miss Magician. To his surprise, they had succeeded and had even retrieved the Grade 0 sealed artifact.
Ma'am Hermit's mystical reenactment has reached such a high level? Did the Feast of Betrayal she mentioned really make the sealed artifact rebel, or could it be that Mr. Fool had provided some help?
Leonard muttered silently as he glanced at the world Klein Moretti, who was seated at the bottom end of the long bronze table. He discovered that his former colleague was rather calm. Melmanches, Klein surveyed the area and said,
"Congratulations, everyone. The hunt this time was very successful. All the spoils of war are here."
As he spoke, he raised his right hand, condensing various bits of mysterious knowledge into a pale white luster. He also included a small number of legends that came from the East, such as Peach Blossom Spring and Lanka's Go Match. He wanted Ma'am Hermit to test if they were mystical or not, and whether there was any real source. The world Klein made the pale white light fly towards the hermit Catalea. Then he pointed at the box of the Great Old Ones, the secret sorcerer's beyonder characteristic, the traveler's luggage, Botus's eyeballs, 9 worms of star, large amounts of gems and materials on the table. He said,
"Ma'am, this is your reward. In addition, you have the right to choose first."
After the battle at the demigod level with the Saint of Secrets, Catalea finally found the bearing and confidence of a saint. She first received the pale white glow and closed her eyes to digest the mysterious knowledge contained within. In the second epoch, the ancient gods believed that the original creator, the oldest one, left some objects behind. Perhaps it was a kingdom formed from a portion of his body, or something that he created. There are 9 of these that contain the various Sephiro. They are the Chaos Sea, Sapphire Castle, River of Eternal Darkness, Knowledge Moor, Tenebrous World, Broodhive, Nation of Disorder, City of Calamity, and the Key of Light. The ancient sun god came from a place known as Chernobyl. The Marauder Pathway's Sequence 0 is called Error. Emperor Rosel's fairy tales might have originated from something that happened before. As the mysticism knowledge resonated in her, Catalea couldn't help but open her eyes and look at the world Gehrman Sparrow. There were too many things inside that shocked her, making her realize that she had opened the door to a whole new world.
I never thought of Mr. Fool's origins in the past. Now I can vaguely grasp it.
A thought flashed through Catalea's mind as she had a guess. She immediately controlled herself. She didn't want to think too much, nor did she dare to think too deeply about it. She was afraid that she would come up with an answer that was enough to make her lose control.
This is one of the 9 Sephiro. Mr. Fool's goal is to gather all the Sephiro and attempt to recover.
Raising her right hand, she nudged her heavy glasses on her nose bridge. Catalea forced herself to focus her attention on the small tales and decided to return to the real world to completely digest the potion before she attempted to create magic with them, allowing her to draw on their power using mystical reenactment. Of course, she also believed that not every one of them would succeed. She believed that a portion of those stories were purely fabricated. After all, this was a gift from Mr. World. There was no guarantee that they would be effective. After all, out of the many fairy tales and ancient legends that Emperor Rosel recounted to Queen Mystic back then, only a few of them truly produced magic. She took a few seconds to compose herself and cast her gaze to the middle of the long mottled table, preparing to choose her spoil of war. Without a doubt, the most eye-catching item was the box of the Great Old Ones, labeled 061. The silver-black jewelry box, embedded with many gems, completely overshadowed all the other items. Catalea wasn't too unfamiliar with Grade 0 sealed artifacts, because Queen Mystic had more than one. It was also because of this reason that the Queen's Element Dawn was able to compete with the ancient organization, Moses Ascetic Order, that had been born in the early 4th epoch. The gap between an angel and a saint was not something the magic of a powerful fairy tale could make up for. To become a truly powerful figure, one had to advance to Sequence 2 or possess a Grade 0 sealed artifact. It wasn't that Ketlea didn't have any desire for the box of the Great Old Ones, but when she thought of the hint that the World German Sparrow had received from Mr. Fool, the terrifying negative effects, the third level's extreme danger, and most of the Beyonder powers that she couldn't control, she felt a sense of horror. Although she had brief luck, she still lacked the ability to seal the box of the Great Old Ones so far. After a series of intense struggles, the hermit Ketlea pointed at the dreamy crystal and said,
I want the secret sorcerer's Beyonder characteristic.
If they could find a suitable high-sequence artisan, it could be transformed into a rather good sealed artifact, one that had barely acceptable negative effects. Queen Mystic Bernadette happened to have the resources to do so, but the commission might not necessarily succeed.
In the end, even if there's only teleportation, that will be enough. However, it's obvious that a secret sorcerer wouldn't only be able to grasp teleportation. Even if the negative effects are excessive, I can get Queen Mystic to shatter and try again, or I could sell it to Miss Magician. Yes, she said that her teacher would prepare the ingredients for her.
Following that, Ketlea nodded at the World German Sparrow to confirm her choice, choosing the secret sorcerer's Beyonder characteristic. Upon hearing Ma'am Hermit's reply, a scene appeared in Klein's mind. Wearing a purple-patterned black robe, the lady wearing a dark-colored hood relied on Blink to leave behind many doppelgangers. Then, they would all ignite a match at the same time.
The little match girl will turn into countless witches selling matchsticks. This is a horrifying fairy tale.
The World Klein couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth as he tersely acknowledged.
All right, it's your right.
He then cast his gaze at Miss Magician. He said,
It's your turn to choose.
Fors said guiltily.
I didn't do anything.
Klein scoffed and said,
You successfully acted as bait.
Fors didn't know what expression she should use to respond, but she heard Mr. Starr seemingly laugh. She slowly took a deep breath and cast her gaze at the spoils of war on the long bronze table. Frankly speaking, she wanted to choose the box of the Great Old Ones because it was an item that her teacher's family had snatched away. She didn't want to use it herself. She wanted to return it to her teacher directly. However, considering that she was only bait, Fors felt that she was not qualified to take an item of this level. Grade 0 sealed artifacts were extremely rare, precious, and dangerous. She had already gained a deep impression of them with Mr. Starr's introduction. She knew that the value of the box of the Great Old Ones was definitely not something a saint's Beyonder characteristic could compare with. With this in mind, she chose under the World German Sparrow's watch. Fors finally gave up the impulse and pointed at the pair of eyeballs. She said,
I'll take them.
She wanted to bring the pair of eyes to her teacher and tell him that Bodis was dead. It was an end to all the hatred. In addition to such a value of the item, Bodis's eye could be made into a powerful hex item or be used as a medium for a curse. It was considered a pretty good item. Klein nodded slightly and did not persuade her. He only pointed at the gems, materials, and the worms of Star, and said calmly,
You also paid the price of a moon paper figurine. You can choose something to make up for it.
Fors reflexively agreed.
All right.
As the apprentice pathway needed gems for several charms and rituals and could still be appreciated normally, Fors took a portion of the gems and waited for the bestowment ceremony to obtain them. With that, Klein shifted his gaze and said to Misjudgment,
It's your turn.
Gio also knew that she had not contributed much, and she knew that she had no ability to withstand the negative effects of the box of the Great Old Ones, so she didn't even take a look at 061 and pointed to the black pocket. She said,
I'll choose Traveler's Bag.
This way, she could carry heavy weapons with her and might even be able to pull out a cannon at a critical moment. As for the problem of strengthening the hidden space after a period of time, she had also considered it. After all, she could still use it for about 1 year for the time being. In the future, she could rent a sealed artifact from Ma'am Hermit to maintain it. Furthermore, at that time, Fors might have already become a secret sorcerer. The World Klein nodded and looked at the star Leonard. He said,
It's your turn.
Leonard did not stand on ceremony. He scanned the area and tapped a few times. He said,
3 worms of star, 20 gems, and those ingredients.
This feels like I'm paying protection fees to the official organizations.
After lampooning his dear poet, Klein turned to Miss Justice and said,
The mission was very successful and I'm very satisfied. Although you have already received your payment, you can still choose a little more.
Audrey could decipher the sincerity of Mr. World's words. Without any excuses, she chose 1 worm of star and 1/3 of the spiritual materials. At this point, as the mission's commissioner, the World Gehrman Sparrow had obtained 5 worms of star, a grade 0 sealed artifact, 1/3 of the spiritual materials, and nearly 30 high-quality gems. He smiled and looked at Fors. He said,
Remember to tell your teacher about this. Just say that this is a gesture of my goodwill, and I want to make a deal with him.
Chapter 1204, Putting Life and Death Aside. Fors wasn't surprised by Mr. World's request. She nervously replied,
All right. What kind of deal is it exactly?
During this period of time, she had communicated with her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham, several times. Under Miss Justice's guidance, she had laid quite a lot of foundation for the impending request. The World Klein laughed hoarsely.
You don't have to tell him what I want for now. Just lay out my chips for him and see if he's interested.
Your bargaining chip is still the promise to break the Abraham family's curse?
Fors cautiously sought confirmation. Klein nodded and pointed at 0-61 on the long mottled table.
It can also be this box of the great old ones.
An item used to exchange for a grade 0 sealed artifact can't be simple. Be it Justice Audrey or the Hermit Catalea, both of them suddenly had such a realization. However, Fors paid more attention to the promise of breaking the curse. This was because she had experienced it herself and knew how tragic her teacher's family was. Deibi. She replied solemnly without hesitation.
All right.
Backland, Westborough, in the basement of a house. St. Tenebrous, who was hidden in the shadows, suddenly grew out of the darkness. Isier. He turned his head as if he was listening to something. The muscles on his cheeks began to twitch. It wasn't just one chunk of flesh, but bits. Not only were they not connected to each other, but they were also interfering with each other. It looked extremely odd. In seconds, Kisma wore an extremely painful expression as his skin tore apart, as flesh and blood beneath squirmed, mixed with a deep black. With a thud, he fell to the ground and prostrated himself before the altar, vomiting out large amounts of organs and shimmering light. St. Tenebrous' head was pressed tightly against the ground as he muttered crazily.
Botus actually died. A secret sorcerer who wields a grade 0 sealed artifact died just like that. There's a tarot card, the Hermit. The 2 enemies that attacked were saints. One was a mysticologist, while the other was a manipulator. The organization that believes in the Fool and uses tarot cards as their code names. Gehrman Sparrow. Azik Eggers.
After an uncontrollable murmur, St. Tenebrous Kisma cried, feeling both vexed and pained.
I repent, I repent, I repent.
A few days later, in an apartments room in Pritz Harbor, the disguised Dorian Gray Abraham had received a letter from Fors through many hands. He examined it carefully and confirmed that there were no issues. After confirming that there were no abnormal signs, he took out the letter with the help of a letter knife. The beginning of the letter was the usual greeting. Following that, Fors directly wrote,
We have already killed Saint of Secrets Botus and obtained the items on his person.
Dorian had originally planned on scanning through the letter quickly, but he ended up stuck on this sentence. He read it a few times and forgot to continue reading. Corbai, Corbai, Corbai. Dorian knew how strong and powerful Botus was. He also knew very well how terrifying a secret sorcerer was. But now, the new student he had been teaching for over a year had told him in a very calm tone that Botus had already been taken care of. In an instant, the only things that echoed in Dorian's mind were thoughts of
Impossible, a lie, and a conspiracy.
He suspected that Force had already been controlled by the Aurora Order. In any major faction, Sequence 4 Beyonders were the absolute upper echelons and extremely important members. How could they be so easily killed? Dorian's throat bobbed up and down as he forcefully focused and continued reading the contents of the letter.
We have obtained the box of the Great Old Ones. I believe you aren't unfamiliar with it.
After reading another line, Dorian's eyelids twitched a few times. He felt that the letter in his hand was as heavy as a boulder. Of course, he wasn't unfamiliar with the box of the Great Old Ones. This was a Grade 0 sealed artifact of the Abraham family, proof that they had once been glorious.
The one that was killed was Botus, who possessed the box of the Great Old Ones.
Dorian's shock kept rising. He felt that things had gone beyond his imagination. On the other hand, he felt that there was a possibility that it wasn't impossible. Perhaps the one who really killed Botus was actually the box of the Great Old Ones. He knew very well how dangerous that Grade 0 sealed artifact was. At the same time, he finally noticed a word, we. This was the first time Force had indicated that she had companions and partners. Of course, Dorian had already guessed it, but he hadn't called her out.
Indeed.
Dorian sighed and eagerly read the rest.
I have a friend who wants to show you his goodwill by pushing for this operation against Botus. He said that he wants to make a deal with you and is willing to use the box of the Great Old Ones or a promise to remove the Abraham family's curse in exchange. He wonders if you are interested. He doesn't know where you are, and I won't tell him. You can totally refuse.
A promise to remove the curse?
Dorian skipped over the box of the Great Old Ones and ruminated on the extremely important part of the sentence. After the first few letters, he had fully understood the true nature of the family's curse. It was both a sorrowful and helpless matter, a glimmer of hope that was brewed out of the pain. Before this, who would have thought that the person who caused the descendants of the Abraham family to lose control would be their ancestors' cry for help? This was like a cruel joke from fate. Dorian didn't know if Mr. Dorn knew the consequences of his actions, nor did he know how to describe his complicated feelings. However, he couldn't help but start searching for a way to make Mr. Dorr return and completely remove the family curse. This was a path with very slim hope, but for the Abraham family it was enough, because a light had finally appeared in the darkness. After an unknown period of time, Dorian folded the letter and smiled bitterly to himself.
Goodwill. Such goodwill is frightening.
After he muttered to himself, he fell into silence again. His expression was gloomy, and his heart seemed to be struggling. Gong! The sound of the wall clock rang punctually, snapping Dorian out of his daze. His expression gradually became solemn, and he finally made a decision. After making up his mind, Dorian felt much more relaxed. He even smiled. He first burned Force's letter before packing his bag and heading out to the steam locomotive station in Pritz Harbor. He was going to Southville, but not to hide, but to make some preparations. He planned on handing all his family's items and potion formulas to one of the family members who was staying there before returning to Pritz Harbor. With his identity as Dorian Gray, he would head to Backlund to meet his student Force and the powerhouse who had shown his goodwill. When the time came, he would consume a type of medicine in advance to allow himself to suffer a powerful curse that rooted itself in his spirit body. He would have to regularly consume another type of medicine to maintain his life. This way, even if he was controlled and unable to commit suicide, he would quickly die because he had no chance to take the medicine. With his spirit body dissipating, he wouldn't leak any key information. For this journey, Dorian had put life and death aside. He was willing to sacrifice his life for that slim hope. Northborough in Backlund, beneath St. Samuel Cathedral. Leonard, who had just had a discussion with the members of the mandated Punishers, the Machinery Hive Mind, and MI9, returned to his office and sat down. At that moment, the slightly aged voice of Pelez Zoroast resounded in his mind.
They finally found the exact location of the Jacob family's treasure trove and are about to enter.
Huh?
Leonard was momentarily stunned, unable to react. Previously, at the gathering of the Hermits of Fate, he had sold the news of the Jacob family's treasure trove. As no one knew what was inside, no one was willing to offer a high price. And Leonard's main goal was not to trade, so he had only exchanged it for some rare spirits. He immediately lowered his voice and said,
Old man, how do you know that?
It's a given that I sent out my avatar to monitor the area. Are you underestimating an angel from the Marauder pathway?
Pala Zoroast replied unhappily. Leonard laughed dryly.
Old man, you've recovered quite well. You even have excess characteristics for an avatar.
I'm already at the level of a sequence 2.
Pala Zoroast scoffed.
Next, don't go out. Just stay inside the cathedral to prevent any accidents from happening.
Are you worried that a trap lies within the treasure?
Leonard asked thoughtfully.
How can a treasure left behind by a marauder angel not have a trap? I can't predict what will happen, but staying underground in the cathedral is definitely safe.
Pala Zoroast said with a scoff. Leonard nodded and suppressed his voice.
Let's hope everything goes smoothly, old man. You promised me that if you can successfully obtain a Sequence 2 Beyonder characteristic, you will steal a Grade 1 sealed artifact from the items they obtained for me.
It wasn't that he was concerned about whether he reaped anything out of it, but rather, it was to ease his sudden anxiety.
Weren't you against stealing?
After a mocking remark, Pales fell silent, as if he was focused on monitoring the situation at the Jacob family's treasure trove. About an hour later, he heaved a sigh of relief in Leonard's mind.
Although there were many traps and accidents, they eventually reached the predetermined target. I only took that characteristic and a sealed artifact. The rest will be their payment. Don't be in a hurry to leave this place. Wait until I absorb that characteristic before leaving. When that happens, there won't be any problems.
Leonard immediately relaxed and leaned back, crossing his legs as he read the newspaper leisurely. In the evening, Pales Zoroast finally spoke again.
It's done.
His voice contained plenty of emotions, but because it was too complicated, Leonard was unable to tell. Seeing that nothing had happened, and that old man might still need to digest, Leonard stood up and rubbed his temples. He left St. Samuel Cathedral and returned to 7 Pinster Street. As he passed through the porch, he suddenly saw a person sitting on the sofa. The man was wearing a classic black robe and a pointed hat. He placed his right leg over his left and was leisurely reading a newspaper. As if sensing Leonard's arrival, that person raised his head and adjusted the monocle on his right eye, revealing a teasing smile. Chapter 1205, A Thousand-Year-Old Trap, Amen, Blasphemer, Amen. Leonard was no stranger to the person in front of him. Not only had he faced his avatar, but he had also heard of his various deeds and nasty character from old man Pales Zoroast. At that moment, Leonard's thoughts nearly froze as his mind went blank. Only a small number of thoughts could spin. Amon's lips suddenly quivered as he muttered a raving that was completely at the level of a deity. One voice after another echoed in Leonard's mind, as though it came from the countless number of Amons.
Are you pleasantly surprised? Are you shocked? After realizing that I won't be able to get Saphira Castle anytime soon, I shifted my focus to Backlund. If it wasn't to fool all of you, why would I have played such a simple cat-and-mouse game with him? I think you two should be in contact. He must have told you that I'm still tracking him and sabotaging his operations, that I even set a trap for him at his destinations. That's just an avatar that's close to Sequence 1. Ah, right. Pales. I forgot to tell you that in the later years of the 4th epoch, I pretended to be the ancestor of the Jacob family. I had long swallowed him in secret. Then, I watched his descendants panic. Then, I thought of a way to add another secret treasure trove to the place where Tudor became Blood Emperor. I didn't finish off these fellows because I had a premonition that this treasure trove would be very useful. I had an avatar that had been sleeping there for more than 1,000 years, patiently waiting for someone to open the treasure trove. As for the other avatars, I didn't synchronize this information to them. That way, I might be able to create a ruse at some point in time. Yes, this kind of synchronization is something I invented. Palez, you're quite behind the times. In order to confirm your whereabouts, I watched that bunch of fellows destroy the traps and take the items away. I watched your avatar steal the characteristic and sealed artifact from their hands. I watched him carefully devour and digest it. Now, my patience has finally paid off. I guess you must be thinking of how to stall for time and wait for a deity's descent.
These voices overlapped each other, tearing through Leonard's thoughts and hurting his soul. It made his head swell and contract, causing a bunch of short black hair to grow on his face. It made his ribs and waist bulge as though it was about to form a new body. With just the ravings alone, Leonard was close to losing control. He was in extreme pain and had no means of resisting. This was the son of the Creator, a king of angels. At the same time, 7 Pinster Street changed. At some point in time, pitch-black stone pillars were erected around them, propping up a majestic cathedral. Each column of the cathedral was embedded with the bones of different races. They were densely packed as they used different eye sockets to stare at the puny Leonard who stood in the middle as though they were conducting a trial. Eamon stood in front of the cross that was more than 100 meters tall in the depths of the church, smiling as he looked at Leonard's grimacing face.
This corpse cathedral is pretty good, isn't it? I just stole it not long ago. This way, if they wish to discover any abnormalities here and do a deity's descent, it can stall for at least 30 seconds. That's enough.
As he spoke, Eamon raised his hand to pinch the crystal monocle that had a beaming face underneath it. Leonard suddenly heard a gong. It was ethereal, as though it came from an infinite distance away. This caused the ear-piercing ravings that tainted Leonard's spirit body to come to an abrupt stop as everything around him turned silent. In Leonard's eyes, beams of light shot out from his body, condensing into a pure figure that was like a wingless angel. The figure was also 100 meters tall, and its body constantly coruscated with a faint glow, as though it was announcing the passage of time. With that, Leonard's body was pushed by an invisible force as he flew towards the door of the corpse cathedral. On the door, transparent and distorted faces appeared. They sealed the inside from the outside, isolating it from the spirit world and the astral world. Gong! Another bell rang. The transparent faces filled with pain froze. Leonard's figure was no longer obstructed. In this short span of time, he passed through the main door of the corpse cathedral without feeling anything. Everything he saw instantly returned to normal. There was still a bit of light high up in the sky. The gas lamps by the side of the streets were already emitting light, illuminating 7 Pinster Street. From the outside, the building was silent, quiet, and dark. There was nobody around. Old man. It was only at this moment that Leonard finally found his train of thought. His heart tightened as he strode forward and returned to the house. However, the door to 7 Pinster Street was so heavy that he couldn't open it any time soon. With this obstruction, Leonard finally regained some of his senses. He hurriedly retreated as he quickly thought of what he could do to save Old Man. After a few steps, he stopped and lowered his head with a solemn expression. He quickly chanted in Jotun,
"The fool that doesn't belong to this era."
Walking through the darkness with the lantern in hand, Klein entered the historical fog immediately. Then he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. After listening to Leonard's prayer, the puzzled and nonchalant-looking Klein instantly sobered up. It was as if he had just woken up from hibernation and had just climbed out of bed when he was splashed with a basin of cold water.
Eamon's true body has gone to Backland. Eamon's true body has found Leonard and Pelez. Aemon stole the corpse cathedral from his brother and used it to delay a divine descent. So it turns out that when he suggested that we play the game of who will be the first to find Black Demonic Wolf Kotar, he had never thought of deciding on a winner. He didn't care what the stakes were either. His goal was to draw my attention and believe that he is still pursuing me and trying to steal Sapphira Castle from me. The trap hidden in the Jacob family's treasure trove was planted by Aemon for 1,000 to 2,000 years. It has finally come into play.
Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he raised his right hand and summoned an item from the junk pile. 061, Box of the Great Old Ones. This was a Grade 0 sealed artifact, and it was also from the Apprentice Pathway. it could better utilize the power of Sapphira Castle and produce better results. In the face of Eamon's true body, this might bring Paula some hope. At the same time, through the prayer light, Klein confirmed that Leonard hadn't been possessed by Eamon. He immediately instructed in the tone of Mr. Fool.
Leave the scene and go to an Evernight cathedral. Also, pray to Evernight.
A pinnacle sequence battle beneath deities was definitely not something that a Beyonder at Leonard's level could participate in. Even though Klein had gained some initial control of Sapphira Castle and held 061, he didn't have much confidence. He only hoped that he could stall for time until a deity's descent happened. Outside 7 Pinster Street, Leonard heard Mr. Fool's words echoing in his ears. He was stunned for a moment before he looked up at the tightly shut door. Then he turned around and used his right knuckle to ruthlessly knock on a certain tooth. A series of illusory mud surged out and sprayed onto the top of Leonard's head, enveloping him from top to bottom. Suddenly, Leonard seemed to transform into a mud doll as he kept sinking to the ground and fusing into the earth. This was a rare natural spirit he had exchanged from the Hermit of Fate. It didn't contain any Beyonder characteristics, and its powers mainly came from the spirit world. It allowed Leonard to quickly traverse the soil at a speed far faster than the steam metro. As Leonard left the battlefield, Klein had picked up the gem-embedded box of the Great Old Ones. He stirred the power of Sapphira Castle and cast his gaze at the pitch-black church that overlapped with the embedded bones. The cathedral isolated his true vision, preventing him from seeing the situation inside. He could only determine that the battle had yet to end through the flashes of light that the stained glass let through.
Use 061's first level's powers to swap its interior space with the Corpse Cathedral? No, isn't this equivalent to letting Aemon enter Sapphira Castle? Just the first level of the box of the Great Old Ones cannot imprison him. Activate the second level and move the entire 7 Pinster Street somewhere else? No, it won't work either. Once we leave Backland, there won't be a timely divine descent. It will be even more dangerous for Palais Zoroast. Third level? Opening it might lead to a switch in owners of Sapphira Castle.
As his thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein came up with an idea. He wanted to narrow the target area to a tiny point and exert pressure on it to crack it. He wanted to exchange the Corpse Cathedral's door and the space in the first level of the box of the Great Old Ones using Sapphira Castle, so that the seal that isolated the spirit world and the astral world would be ineffective. If that was the case, the deities would realize the situation and accelerate the speed of a deity's descent. At the end of the long mottled table, Klein sat in his high-backed chair and aimed at the crimson star representing Leonard as he opened the first level of the box of the Great Old Ones. The surging power in Sapphira Castle suddenly calmed down, returning to its usual concealment as it silently pierced through the crimson star. In the real world, at 7 Pinster Street, the door of the Corpse Cathedral that overlapped with ordinary buildings lost its luster. Following that, it became a light pool with gravel and cobblestone. The situation inside and outside suddenly cleared up, and it was reflected in Klein's eyes. In front of the cross that was 100 meters tall, the black-robed, pointed hat, and a monocled Aemon slowly turned around to the open door. He held a crystal pillar formed from light and shadows in his hands. There were many 12-ringed worms of time swimming rapidly inside. Everything around them seemed to stop. Aemon raised his head and looked up into the sky as the corners of his mouth curled up.